Welcome back to Logo Legends, the podcast about teams and their logos, branding, and identities throughout history. I'm your host, Kasabe. New episodes of Logo Legends are posted every Thursday on YouTube with visualizations, as well as Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you've missed an episode, be sure to check those out. We're covering the 4 pro North American major sports leagues to start out with, and today's episode will focus on the NHL. So I'm a huge hockey fan, and I don't think there's really a debate as to what the most exciting live sports event is. I personally think that playoff hockey, just with its constant back and forth action and lack of stoppages for the most part, is just something where you can really just feel the intensity build with every moment that occurs during the game. There aren't too many stoppages like in the NFL or MLB, and just the stadium atmosphere in general. I mean, every playoff series is going to be insane, but hockey, it's just all so confined, and you can just really feel that energy just almost like vibrate through you almost. But there are a few sports that I've personally seen on television, and the experience that you get from watching the broadcast is a whole lot different than going to the live event. So for me personally, I can't stand basketball broadcasts. But when I go and watch them live in person, basketball is just so much more fun in that regard. Hockey's another one where you can kind of follow the puck, but like the camera movements and everything, it does involve a lot of active tracking as you're watching the broadcast, which is the same with any sports broadcast, but you're kind of at the disposal of the cameraman itself in case he loses the puck. Or if you're watching football, you know, when you hand off the ball to the running back and it's actually a fake, sometimes you can deke out the cameraman. There are a lot of instances in hockey where you don't really know where the play is. If you're watching the game live, it's a whole lot easier. And the reason I bring up the broadcast level is there's been some new additions to the NHL and hockey broadcasts in general this season, and that's with the addition of digital advertisements on the boards. Before I get too into detail about the advertisements on the boards and just some of the measures that they've been taking on the broadcast level, I think it's important to kind of talk about the evolution of the NHL over the last couple of years. So a few years ago, teams in the NHL were given the option to place a logo or a brand on the top of their helmet, just a singular advertisement. And now this year, we're starting to see a primary sponsor on some of the uniforms as well, something that actually appears on the chest of the jersey. Those who follow the NBA also know that they've been taking a similar approach. A lot of NBA teams have a primary sponsor, and just today at the recording of this video, the Boston Red Sox just added a logo to their uniforms in MLB. So even though the advertisements are being added to the jerseys, and it's kind of this weird new territory where everybody's unsure about how they should feel, I think having a singular jersey sponsor is okay. And a lot of these sponsors tend to be local sources that are close to the team and kind of have that rapport with the community. There are some exceptions, obviously. There are some where you're not really a localized brand. So I follow the Minnesota Timberwolves. Their logo sponsor for a while was Fitbit, which is not a Minnesota company. But like for the Red Sox today, when they announced that, they're from MassMutual, which is Massachusetts, local to the Boston area. It's different from a stadium sponsor. I know a lot of teams are kind of represented by their stadium sponsor, but in a lot of cases that goes beyond one team that plays there. You might have some multiple franchises in the same stadium or some other events that take place when the sports season is in its off season. But to me, having a main sponsor on the uniforms just kind of shows that you're invested in the franchise and not just like a run-of-the-mill sponsor. What I'm really unsure about is what this will lead to in the future. So it seems like a lot of leagues are doing like a trial or test run just to kind of see like what the fans think of adding some of these advertisements to the front of the jerseys. And once we're past like the initial pushback from the fans, they might just start adding a few more and then a few more until eventually you just have this whole smorgasbord of advertisements on the uniforms. So I think this is something that North American sports at the very least is going to push towards. The NFL is like one of the few that really hasn't, but their revenue totals are way higher than like every league. MLB, NHL, NBA, for example. But it's just maybe going to get to the point where we might find it a bit ridiculous without even really realizing it. Like you look at some soccer kits around the world, you have a lot of sponsors where they're the main brand on the front, not the team necessarily, but like a main brand that represents like a soccer team, football team for those of you internationally. NASCAR's another one. There's just so many ads emblazoned on the cars. And that one, I guess, makes a little bit more sense because the cars are going so fast. You don't have that like static background like you do with a NHL rink where you have the advertisements that are easily seen. The cars are the main product placement. So that one is a little bit more acceptable because where else are you going to go with the cameras, for example? But essentially, it might get to the point where it starts interweaving itself with the team branding, maybe just a little bit too much, and you start to lose a bit more of like the team identity. But I think that's something that's going to affect the NHL more than other sports leagues in North America. If you look at the revenue totals for each league, you have the NFL, NBA, and MLB at the top three, and NHL is kind of lagging behind. There are a lot of other international sports leagues, for example, like soccer and cricket, that make a lot more money than they do. And as a result, the NHL might take a bit more drastic action. They already kind of have to some extent. Like I mentioned, they have the advertisements behind the boards. They have the jersey and helmet sponsors. During the pandemic season, they had to redo all the divisions just so they could play in their own little bubble. And they had like corporate sponsors for each of those divisions where they got like the naming rights to the division. It just didn't really seem right. So again, I think some of the pushback's going to be when it starts bleeding into like the team identity, but the game broadcast, if you're not able to go to the actual game and see it live, your only way of really seeing the game is via broadcast. So I can see where if you have like ads on the jerseys, you don't necessarily have to buy the jerseys. If you're like really hardcore against like having advertisements on the jerseys, you can buy other stuff. You can buy t-shirts, hoodies, other team gear that might not have that advertisement. Sure, the jersey's kind of the crown jewel. It's the thing that's the most authentic. But once you have advertisements take over the broadcast to the point where you don't have that immersion anymore and you start to feel like you're pelted and inundated with advertisements, I mean, a lot of you might already feel that way, but like it's going to get a whole lot worse, I think. So allow me to explain just a little bit. Traditionally, you have the sponsors on the boards of the rink that you kind of go back and forth from one end to the next. You have some that are on the ice, like the main four, in addition to like the logo at center ice for the team. Over the last few years, there are these like superimposed ones that they put on the glass, and I'll talk a little bit more about those later, but they're trying to like add in new elements of technology where you can kind of rotate the sponsors that you have during the game. And with a lot of other sports leagues, this is a bit simpler because in baseball, for example, you just have the pitcher going to home plate repeatedly. You have a green screen back there that you can change out. And there's a lot of action shots of that particular area. With hockey, though, the action is constantly moving and you want to satisfy all the advertisers. So you have to add in some options where you can like superimpose or digitally place a product during the middle of the game, kind of rotate that out as well. So since they can change that out at any time, some companies pay top dollar to put their branding or their logo during the crucial parts of the game. So for hockey games, think of like the last 2 minutes of the third period. Everybody's going to be watching to see if the game goes to overtime or if the team ties it up, if there's anything with like the empty nets where they have an extra attacker on the ice where there's going to be more offense. So it's kind of that game with the advertisers and the broadcasters where it's like, how can I get the most eyes on my product? How do I make sure that like people remember my brand and that retention is there? And since the ads change every so often with these new digital versions, there's a version now where you actually have the boards themselves behind the net change out during the course of the game. Your eye is drawn to them a whole lot more because this is a new sensation and it's something that's like actually taking place during the course of the game, so you kind of notice when the sponsors swap out after a few minutes. We're starting to see a lot more of this in advertising and even content creators on things like YouTube and TikTok, where you have a lot of jump cuts, motion across the video itself, and the hypothesis is, with all of these things going on the screen, your eye is constantly going back and forth, and the thought is that the retention or like the watch time goes up as a result. The trick is though, you want to have enough visual phenomena where your synapses keep firing and just kind of have that brain activity, but not have it be too over the top where it's overwhelming. So from an advertiser standpoint, I mean, everybody wins. More eyes are glued to the screen. They watch it more consistently throughout the duration of the hockey game, for example. And even though there might be like an ad rotation where your brand, if you're an advertiser, isn't seen the whole duration of the game like there would be with a static advertisement on the boards, the chances are that it's more likely to fall into someone's consciousness when it's constantly moving across the boards. The only problem is when the technology interferes with the actual product on the ice. So for hockey, recently we've seen a lot of issues this year with the implementation of the digital advertisements on the boards where it kind of superimposes themselves on the players. And that can lead to some real negative feedback for whatever brand is there or just the broadcast in general. I, for one, have seen a lot of outroar on Twitter about how really bad it looks, just from like the look of the broadcast, how unprofessional it kind of seems. how advertisements are ruining everything. So it's not a good look if you're a company to have your ad on the boards while this is going on and people are constantly trying to cancel this new technology. I understand that it's a new technology and it'll probably take a little bit of time to flesh out just based on what happens on the ice. You can't always control what's going on the ice. But what I will say is that it looks better than some of those superimposed logos that I've seen during hockey and baseball broadcasts in my local market. Because a lot of those, it's just so out of the way of the game of play. So, for example, I've seen some really high up on the boards, like that almost goes into the crowd. And your eye's drawn to it in like an annoying way. It's just like a bug that's kind of flying around and you're trying to ignore it. You're trying to like focus on something that's more important, but you can't. It's just there. The trick is to be seen, but not stick out like a sore thumb or to have it just like blatantly shoved in your face. So with all these digital advertisements, why do people waste the time of putting ads on the jerseys for the players that are going around the ice? Well, that's the thing that you're trying to watch the most. You're going to be looking at the players to see what they're doing, what kind of actions they take while they're skating. And if your advertisement is on that jersey, chances are people are going to see that the most. And even though it's a static advertisement, the players are moving. So you're kind of tracking the advertisement along with the players. You also don't have to worry about what side of possession the team has on the boards because there might be some logos and advertisements that are just on the left side of the ice as opposed to the right. Or if the team goes on the road for a road game, the advertisements are different from stadium to stadium. So this is something that you can not only watch all game long, but for all 82 games of an NHL season, for example. So that's that middle ground that the NHL, especially over other leagues, is trying to figure out at this moment. How many logos can we put on the uniform before it's too much and people start to complain? And how much can we add to the broadcast for those advertisers to line our pockets without the fans getting too bothered? So like it or not, hockey fans, I do think these advertisements are here to stay and they'll continue to keep building on that over the next few years, I would imagine. There might be a little bit of a holdup with the jersey deal with Adidas ending soon before I believe they switch over to Fanatic. So that's when they really might start to push kind of that more advertisements and just in-your-face kind of stuff. So what are your thoughts? What do you think is too much? I mean, a lot of you probably think that we're already there, but like how many jersey sponsors do you think that the NHL and other sports leagues can realistically get away with? Or how much can they do with the broadcast before it really starts affecting how we watch the game? If you're watching this episode on YouTube, be sure to leave me a comment with what you think, or you can tweet at me on Twitter. Again, my name is Kasabe, that's Kasabe, and then compiles with a K. So we've covered the 4 major North American pro sports. So far in these episodes, we'll be doing a lot more of a deep dive into some nicknames, kind of like we did with the Cleveland Browns. And that's not going to be limited to those 4 sports leagues. I just wanted to do one for each just to kind of start off. But we might go into college teams. Minor league baseball teams are a fun one. A lot of crazy names there. So if you have any ideas for a future episode, please let me know. I'd be interested to look up some team histories that I'm not as familiar with. But again, thank you for listening to Logo Legends. New episodes every Thursday on my YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Take care for now. We'll see you next time.